Today, we're here with Nick. Nick, thanks so much for taking the time. Can you please introduce yourself in Aescape?
Thanks, Vedant. It's great to be here. Excited to walk through all the things that we've learned so far about building and shipping robots in the real world. I'm Nick Akiona, and I'm a principal engineer and architect at Aescape. We build robots that help people feel better through massage and body work. Think about us as the physical AI for recovery. So our journey begins with the app and the website. You go to escape.com, you'll see a video of the system itself, trying to set the right expectations of what are you actually going to see coming into the room, which is a table that has two robot arms attached, one on each side. They can travel down the sides of the table with a linear rail. And then each arm will go and approach the body and then do work on your back while you're lying in the prone position. There's also a screen in front of you. It's basically, think of it as a tablet that you can interact with that is showing you the work that you're getting. So it kind of outlines the body work and the program that we have planned and gives you a number of controls at the same time. So you can adjust the pressure in real time. You can always pause the massage. We show where we are on the body with these little highlighted markers. And then we have, zooming out for a second, a few cameras overhead that build a model of the body, right? So we're able to actually see where you are, respond to your emotion, and then accurately target where we are trying to go.
Yeah, I had the chance to actually get an Aescape massage when I was in New York my last time around. It was fantastic, and I would highly recommend everyone who's listening to give it a shot. Nick, can you tell us a bit more just about the company, maybe the scale of your deployments, what your robots look like? Just give our listeners some background.
Of course. So we're a few years into this journey. It's been, I think, 8 years of building this business. We have about 150 systems actively giving body work and around 90,000, coming up on 100,000 sessions delivered actually in the wild, which has been a huge milestone. I'm counting down to that 100,000 number.
Amazing. That's a lot of people using robots in their everyday lives, like you said, to improve their bodies and how they feel. Yeah, so really excited for this one. Nick, one thing I love about your background is you're one of the people, I think, in the industry who really thinks about robotics as a product holistically and an experience that you deliver to customers. Because you guys are so customer facing, you're not tucked in the back of some warehouse. You're front and center, right, with a customer product, a customer experience. And so really want to understand how you think about building products in robotics in such a way. Maybe first to start, product already has a ton of different definitions in the software world. How do you define it in robotics?
Well, it has a lot of the same similarities. And before I go into that, I'll give a little bit more background about myself. So I mentioned that I'm a principal engineer and architect at Aescape. In my prior role to this, I was the director of product, actually building and leading a product team at Aescape. And then before that, I was the head of robotics, driving everything to do with the motion control system software and actually how we deliver a massage itself. So I've worn multiple hats, and part of my role has been figuring out how to build the team in a way that is able to produce a world-class product. Now, when it comes to the product role in robotics specifically, it shares a lot of the same similarities with broader software. The framework I've used is product owns the what and the when, and you're interfacing with the how and the why, right? So at the engineering team, you're working closely on defining how you actually build out, the solution or the feature, and you're trying to bridge and understand what is the actual needs coming from the market end, whether it's from partnerships, direct feedback, understanding the system reliability. You're kind of living in that middle ground, acting as a bridge and getting everything to really formulate into a cohesive roadmap that you can execute against. Now, in robotics, it is just difficult. Hardware is hard. Knowing what you're actually trying to build is tricky. Everything is a research project, right? Like robots we're trying to emerge as a category of, a product that exists in the wild, but we're very nascent, very new. The UX is unknown. You say, we're going to have a person interacting with a system that delivers a massage. is actually a robot arm coming and interacting on the body? What is a good version of that experience? Nobody knows, right? We are taking a guess, going with our intuition. So you have to have strong conviction about what this needs to look like in the future. You need to have enough background and understanding to, go into the weeds of what does it take to build a reliable, robust robot moving through that is safe and can interact with somebody. And then you have to deal with what I would call slower cycle times to actually develop and test features versus traditional software where it takes weeks to actually get new features out the door. With robotics, potentially months if you have to have hardware changes. But when you have deployment to a website, I can make a change and deploy it overnight.
One of the things you said is like in product, in robotics, it's a lot different from building SaaS where you can rapidly iterate in SaaS. You can decide something on a Monday, hopefully ship it the next day. In robotics, if you change something in hardware, it could take months, right? But you have a lot of tools at your disposal. You can make hardware changes to solve problems. You can make software changes to solve problems. Some on the robot, some maybe in your HMI, some in your web app. Do you have any good frameworks for thinking about how to figure out where you should solve a problem? Like what level of the stack, and how do you make those kind of decisions when they come about?
Well, you'll find that a lot of the decisions are made according to the phase of development that you're in, right? So when you are building a product and you're going through the EBT, DBT, kind of PBT stages, once you're doing things on the manufacturing line, it is difficult to go and change the hardware of the product, right? You should really be looking at the next version of the product for doing that in hardware. Now, when you're upfront, you'll always have some unknowns. You're going through the proto phase. You're trying to actually identify and lock down, what are my PRD requirements? What are the ERD requirements? How do I get this all set and balanced so I understand what's being delivered in the hardware, what's being delivered in the software, what's the features needed from the system? And there's always this ambiguity of, we might want this feature in the future, we may not. Like, what is this actually going to take? So you're trying to create with the hardware a platform that can support the feature set, the reasonably predicted feature set that you may deliver, right? And what is reasonable is very tricky because obviously you want your hardware to do everything, right? Who wouldn't want their hardware system to do everything? But you can make choices in this that actually cause you to spin an implementation. So I would think about it as what are the features that we would reasonably invest in, right? Like look at the ones that you think are going to be the highest priority over the next 2 years, and then try to build the hardware platform that supports that feature set, not necessarily every feature that you want in the future, because you should plan to go through multiple generations of hardware. And if you try to do everything up front, you can end up basically spinning, having your team trying to develop too many things that you don't need. We did this ourselves. We built in some functionality into the linear rail, went with EtherCAT versus a simpler architecture like Modbus. The features that EtherCAT supported, we are just building now, even though we've been in market for a year and a half, right? So did we need to spend the time to go the EtherCAT route up front? In hindsight, probably not, right? We probably could have done that on a second generation of the system versus putting everything into the first generation. I'll also say, if it's anything to do with safety, put it into the hardware. As much as possible, that helps a lot going through the certification process, especially if you can source components that are certified themselves. All right, so having an e-stop is one of the things that we put in there. But mostly what we're trying to do is our main safety consideration is preventing entrapment. So you have two arms applying force on your back. If those arms lock up, are you trapped on the table, right? So the mitigations for that, for us and for our certifications and reliability, are all tied to the hardware versus relying on software. And the more you can do that in the hardware, the easier it is to actually get the product out into market, and the more robust it is for your consumers in the end experience.
Tidbit there that you said that was interesting is, you don't want to boil the whole ocean, right, with your hardware spec, because there's going to be kind of future generations of hardware that you build. When you think about on the macro of how you how you line up these different hardware versions while also delivering experiences and improvements on a given version that's in production. How do you think about that trade-off? How far out are you thinking about the new hardware version? How do you make sure those are kind of going in sync? Um, yeah, would be curious about any insights there.
For me, I'm mapping in the 3 to 5 year range, just a general, because I think about the lifespan of the hardware, right? So if we're saying that this hardware platform is going to exist for 5 years, and the next one after we launch, this current version is going to take, let's say, a year and a half to 2 years to develop and get out into market, right? So that's effectively you shipped one version, 2 years later, 2.5 years later, you ship the next version, and there's another 2.5 years where you're supporting the current version. So you have to determine if the next version of the system you ship is going to support the existing features, how much of that is going to map over versus become something that's kind of in maintenance mode. And you can almost map this to cars in a large way. Like, look at the hardware businesses that are successful shipping at scale, right? Like, cars go through a yearly rev with a 3 year kind of big change to the architecture, to the chassis, to the vehicle itself. So that's my like rough mental model. Ideally, we're moving a little faster in the changes that we can make, but that's the analogous framing that I have.
That makes sense. That's a good analogy. I also think about NVIDIA. They have the yearly rev and then the 2 year kind of bump from the H to the B or whatever. So I think that's a good framework to think about it. Switching gears a bit, at Escape, you talked about there's a user who signs up for the body work, but where is the user getting the massage? Oftentimes it's at a luxury hotel or it's at a gym. And so you have a few different stakeholders who are involved with the buying the robot, installing the robot, and then finally using the robot. Who are those stakeholders? How do you kind of map those out at Escape? And then how do you think about serving or catering to their needs when building this product?
It's actually one of the trickier points of our business. The mapping of stakeholders, I'd say, is something that has taken us being an industry to figure out and taken us meaningful time after deployment to figure out. So when you look at our business, we're B2B2C. So we ship to other partner locations who are then having members coming in that are the ones paying for the bookings in the end. And we also have deployments in private environments, right, which are just direct to consumer. So we have some of these. I think actually Logan Paul was the more public kind of famous example where we got one in his house in Puerto Rico for him to have and to use. Now, even within, let's say, our partners, there are several groups of stakeholders, right? So first, there's the market category, right? So we have kind of this premium wellness side. We have the luxury gyms and fitness. And then we also have the hotels and hospitality, right? So these different categories. And then with each of those, there's a different structure for who you need buy-in from, right, to actually sell and get these systems deployed. The hotel space is interesting because we are both, a service and a good that the hotel groups themselves will want to vet and sign off on. So think of this as your Marriott corporate is going through and saying, this is something that we are happy to have in our locations. And then you have the actual operators of those hotels, which are purchasing that franchise and running it, right? And they sometimes have hotels across multiple groups. So there's all these cross-cutting people that need buy-in. And the buy-in you need depends on the contract type that you have and the amount of that contract as well for within individual businesses. So if you're trying to get a multi-year contract signed, that's going to be harder than if you're doing a month-by-month contract or an annual contract. If you're above certain numbers, that also will raise additional reviews and approvals. So getting the right fit and the offering to be able to move quickly takes kind of really understanding your customer and their business structure. Then we have internal stakeholders, which I think you're also curious about here, which from the product side, you have to work through the marketing, the partnerships, operations, and make sure when you're designing the system, you're getting the buy-in from each of these groups for how you're going to talk about some of these features, how that gains traction with the actual members at the end of the day, because we are driving new members, new users to our partner businesses at the same time and need language to be able to do so. And then we have to make trade-offs and choices around the operations, right? What's the size of the pallet you're delivering with this system? How easy is it to install? How does it actually drive the total installed cost, not just the BOM, but the actual end cost it takes to get a system all the way set up and running?
Okay, so that's a pretty complex map, as you said. There's a lot of different stakeholders there, both internal and external. How do you think about prioritizing between those folks?
So to start with, I'll talk about it from the external perspective, because that's really what we care about here. Internal is how efficiently we are able to move and does buy-in from stakeholders. But really what we care about is the satisfaction of our partners and the ability or the enjoyment of our members, right? So the satisfaction of our partners and the enjoyment of the members. And the main thing is reducing churn, right? Churn is what will really kill the business. So we want people to be using the product and to be coming back. We want partners to purchase it and purchase another one, or renew a contract that they have with us. That's the main thing to focus on. You could talk about building new capabilities. You could talk about trade-offs versus spending time on reliability and ironing out every single bug within the system. Once every 1,000 hours, the screen goes black or something like that. So how do you manage the trade-off between these things? And for me, it goes back to really minimizing that churn and understanding the slice of the market in which you are doing so. Which we talk about that full kind of partner stakeholder map. The trap that you can fall into is to go after every slice of the market at the same time because people are interested, not realizing how much time and energy it takes to really nail that specific slice, right? Is the ideal Escape product and integration points and operation flow really the same in hospitality as it is in luxury fitness, right? Or do they differ? So the ideal world is you're able to focus on a slice that is narrow enough to have focus for the team and to work through everything you need to get that retention curve really where you want to minimize churn. And the balancing point between, do you work through things you would consider reliability versus adding new features, is which do you think contributes to churn the most, right? Are they missing, say for us, it was we didn't have enough work on different areas of the body. When we initially launched, we didn't do the legs, we just did the upper back to the glutes. So we're missing the hamstrings and the calves. And adding that actually meaningfully increased the retention of members coming back. We were able to see jumps tied to both of those because they are features that deliver value that are sticking points for the member. At the same time, we have things I would consider a degradation of the experience, right? So we have a graceful fallback, which is to pause the massage, right? This is a correct and desirable behavior in some cases, and in others, it is a bit of a degradation. And what I mean by that is if you are moving, we pause the massage, we lift off, arms go back, we say, are you ready to resume? Similar to how a person would do that interaction. We also use that same mechanism if we get too far off the reference trajectory for some reason. Let's say like we get stuck trying to go over the glutes, right, which are deformable and squishy, and you can kind of get like tied up in there. Or if for some reason the apparel gets snagged, right, your shirt was untucked and the part of the touch point or the end effector, right, kind of slides and starts pulling on that apparel, right, we'll pause the massage and reset. These are things that are undesirable points of our experience. And we could spend an infinite amount of time driving that all the way to zero, or we could spend time adding in the features that took us to the hamstrings and the calves, right? So we're trying to balance, where we put that, and we're listening closely to our members for what is the reason, they may not come back, right? So we have re-engagement surveys and we have research studies that we run, and we try to like actually measure and quantify and track retention, and we're watching what moves the needle on these different things.
It sounds like for you, you have like this key metric, which is churn, and a lot of the decisions that you're making, you just talked about kind of the the capability versus reliability, like adding new features versus reducing those failure points. You're thinking about it through the lens of what reduces churn, and that is kind of driving a lot of the decision making when thinking about what to allocate resources on.
Yeah, that's my mental framework. Our metric is actually the inverse. It's looking at retention across cohorts. So we look at different cohorts and everything, but like mentally, I'm thinking about like minimizing that churn.
So moving on, I think you and I have talked about this, that the product, the robot, is just kind of the tip of the spear of the Escape experience, right? And when we think about amazing consumer brands like Nike or Apple, you kind of like get this sense of what the experience is end to end outside of just the product. And I know that you and your team are trying to design and evoke a similar feeling with your customers. Um, can you tell me a bit more about that? Like, what does it mean to build a unified experience with Escape, and how are you designing for that?
So our experience extends far beyond just in the room, right? The core part of the product is this table that delivers body work, delivers massage, and helps you recover. But we need to drive engagement outside of just that system, right? Both from the member and the partner perspective. So we have quite a large surface area when it comes to actually shipping a product in our space. We have the member app, right, on the website to drive bookings, to engage. We have features that we're building after the massage as well, helping to show the outcomes of the massage. What did you like? What did you respond to? What did other people like? How does that compare? Start to like build in those incentive mechanisms, show streaks, things like that. And we also have a partner facing app, call it Concierge, that they use to help manage operations, right? So this is typically on a tablet sitting at the front desk at wherever location you go into. And they're using that to monitor the status of the session, the checking in of the next member, including information that we can surface to help them engage with their user, their customer. Part of the reason people use the Escape system as a partner is to drive new members into their business, right? So they're going to look at, have you come in before? Are you a first time member? Have you engaged? Did you have a good experience last time? Is there a different thing that we can do to make you more comfortable given the feedback that you gave us last time? Building in kind of those mechanisms to help their business run smoothly and give the member the best experience possible.
When you think about the brand itself, what are you trying to convey? What are the words that you want people to associate with Escape? And then how does that actually lead to decisions that you make about what you do with all of those different surface areas?
The language in which we use to talk about our business is actually really interesting. We've played around with this a bit, and you'll see some differences over time in our marketing and our posts, and including what we were told to us versus what we tried to say and position ourselves as. We made a very explicit choice in our go-to-market, which was to not refer to our system as a robot. Right? We're trying to communicate around the function and the value we deliver, not be some novel technology. The market response to that was to point at us and say robot. Like everyone else used robot to talk to us about what we were, right? So the language in which we wanted people to think and frame didn't necessarily align with what the initial kind of customer response looked like. And we took that and went with it for a bit, right? So you'll see posts, if you were to scroll back through our Instagram, about the viral robot massage, because that is what people would post about us. And we kind of tried to feed that network effect, try to get the flywheel going of people sharing and discussing and being willing to try the system. And we also positioned within, broadly, right, we're trying to position ourselves, and I think have done so successfully, as a premium brand, right? So we want to be a premium brand and experience that you go and get, right? We want to associate with top tier names as well. And we've been very fortunate to do so with deployments at Equinox and the Ritz-Carlton, for instance. And then we've also been figuring out the language of our category, right? So are we really massage, right? That was the kind of initial entry point. But what we found is that the connotations and consumer expectations of massage don't match the actual product that we have shipped and our aspirations and desires for that product, right? We view this as the value of bodywork is bodywork is extremely valuable for helping to improve your physical well-being, right? If you build it into your routine, you can actually see change in the state of your muscles. Not that I'm trying to make medical claims about, the things you could do, but we are able to observe, an impact as a result of the work that we deliver. And people view massage as a luxury, and they view it as recreation versus viewing it as the function, right? As a function of recovery. So what you'll see in a lot of our marketing now is this transition to trying to make that category clear of this work is about recovery and moving to the language of body work versus massage, where that can be a little bit clearer, even if some of the relaxation elements that you get from the term massage are missing. And we're working to define and make the function resonate in the way in which we talk about the brand and language. The premium elements will still match, but premium and accessibility, right, will be two core things. And then within that, we have to really settle on what is the category and a language that communicates the value of body work and building it into your routine.
I'm hearing, premium brand, wellness, function. Something for me when I actually tried out the massage was, laying down on the table, and you said the word prone, right? I was in this prone position, and there's two robot arms, behind me who are about to give me a massage. For me, as a robot nerd, like, this was awesome. I was super excited. For a lot of people who maybe this is their first time even interacting with the robot, it might be something that's a bit, uncomfortable or anxiety-inducing at first. How do you design for that comfort and safety and trust when a robot is physically interacting with someone's body?
It's in all of the little details. And it's funny when you think about the people we've had on the table and how comfortable they are with the system. Roboticists are among the least comfortable. They are typically the most skeptical bunch that you can bring in, which made hiring for me, especially early on, quite tricky, right? I'm like, I need you to come in and get a massage, and then you will see, what this is and what this can be. But we've all, done development with robots, seen them move quickly and rapidly, and are like, is this really something I want touching me? So the nuances that go into this, right? The first thing is we always leave the arms in a compliant mode. So when you walk in, you can kind of push them around and move them. And there's a bit of, just feeling what to expect from that. Now, not everyone touches the arms themselves, but many do. And the visual profile of the system matters as well, right? So the arms are purposely mounted low next to the side of the table, trying to be less imposing. The visual kind of footprint leaves a lot of open space, making it feel more open for you. You're not going to be kind of trapped or enclosed or claustrophobic when you have these two things pressing on top of you. The feeling that when the arms are actually pressing on you, of how it responds to your breathing matters. When you breathe in, do you feel like you're restricted even though it's pushing on your back, or does it give? Does it comply? Right? So subtleties on that front. The visual side was another key component when you're laying down on the table. The screen you see in front of you always shows markers of where the two touch points are at all times. So it's kind of this communication of, we know where we are on your body, makes you feel more comfortable. right? You don't have to guess, is that the spot you intended to be in, right? We are showing you that this is the spot we intended to be in, and you can feel it in that spot. So you're like, okay, it knows where it is. It's doing the thing it's supposed to be doing, right? So there's that visual communication back. And then doing things in an intuitive fashion. So I mentioned response to breathing. It's also the movement I talked about before. If you move, it will pause. I refer to that as, in the unintentional cases, a degradation of the experience. But in the intentional cases, it's important to note that that has been called out a number of times as comforting to people, right? If I move or get up, it is aware, right? It knows that I am not in a place to deliver the massage, and it'll wait and pause for me. And then we also ease into touch. So we don't just come down and press really hard on your body. We try to think about the amount of time it takes you to relax after initial contact, which isn't immediate. Some people, it takes 2-3 minutes until they actually start really relaxing. And we found that small things like, well, what we thought was a small thing and debated internally on a good amount, which was the heated touch points. And that the small amounts of heat that radiate through that point of contact actually do a lot for people to start relaxing as they get into their session.
I agree. Like, I think it's, like you said, the little things that make it, and the little things and the attention to detail and the obsession and the craft is what makes it, amazing, what makes it special. You talked about, previously about retention as kind of like the driver of the business, right? Like, how are we measuring success? When you zoom down and think about what makes a great escape session, how do you measure that internally?
So the top level you mentioned is retention, and then it kind of goes in from there, right? So retention, you're seeing across session behaviors, and then within a single session, we have surveys that we ask at the end, right? We ask for what is effectively a CSAT score, where you give us a top level rating and can provide additional feedback. And then within the session, we have different engagement points for you to provide feedback, right? So there is a thumbs up button or a heart button and a thumbs down button that lets you say if something is uncomfortable, or also say if you are really enjoying something. We look for engagement around these, but they aren't necessarily fully indicative of if you had a good session or a bad session. Some people don't want to press a bunch of buttons telling us things, right? They're there for their second time, third time. And if we don't do a lot with that information in the session, they're not going to continue to kind of press those buttons and give us feedback. Then we have the actions that directly matter, right? And directly influence your session live. Those are the pressure and the ability to skip or move on. So if you have something you don't like, you can just skip to the next segment of work. So we track the usage of both of those. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong about adjusting pressure. We want you to do it. We want you to be able to do that. But if you're moving it around 30 times in the span of a few minutes, that means that the content itself is wildly inconsistent, right? As far as what you need, right? So the engagement and the frequency of engagement with things like pressure, likewise with moving on and skipping, right? We want that to be a relatively low percentage because we're trying to really curate this session for you. And then we look for the kind of technical metrics as well, right? So those pauses that I mentioned before. Those are the simple, kind of straightforward top level pieces. And then we're building in more complexity around planning and A/B testing, different things, trying to tie those to retention. All of those get a little trickier just because of the frequency of use is quite sparse, right? So how often does a person go in for a massage or body work today? For most, it's not that frequent. Most people don't have that as a routine. So if you're looking at somebody to come back every, say, 60 days, 30 days, which are two of the retention metrics that we track, the learning attribution is quite difficult over that span, which is another reason why we lean heavily on our licensed massage therapists and their expertise in knowing what is really good for the broader set of people.
So yeah, you talked a little bit about earlier about how users actually wear specialized Aescape clothing whenever they're getting a massage. I don't think most people know this. Can you just tell us more about what do you wear? What led to the decision of having the specialized clothing, and yeah, any maybe lessons it just taught you about building the overall product and experience at Escape?
So this is a fun decision point for us, and I think it's really a critical one for the overall experience that gets overlooked. We opted to go with using specialized clothing as the medium for delivering kind of smooth, continuous contact. So what this looks like is a pair of leggings and a tight compression jersey that you wear on top. That gives us a consistent friction profile, including across members, and does a whole lot of other things for us. And I'll get into some of those details, but just note that this decision, I think, is one of the best ones we've made and one of the worst. Like, it is somehow both, because from a negative perspective, it adds so much operational complexity, both for development, but especially for having our partners manage something else, right? Like, we're trying to be as frictionless as possible. And now partners have to take care of laundering all these different shirts and leggings, making sure they're folded, making sure there's enough inventory for the day. And that is a different operational function. Some of these locations already have, especially those who have spas, like the table coverings and such that they pull from. So it's not the biggest leap in the world, but it adds real friction day to day. So that's from the partner perspective. And I'd say from the partner management perspective, it's likely a net negative. From the member perspective, I view it as a big win, right? So we talked earlier about trust and comfort. This is a key element in that. You're not lying naked on a table, right? Which is how traditional massage is, right? You take off all your clothes, you lie down on the table. Now we have two cameras, staring at you the whole time while you don't have clothes on, right? That's not great. People aren't going to feel super comfortable with that as a mechanism if they have to interact with a robot arm for the first time, which, mind you, most of our consumers, I think, with rare exception, our consumers have not ever interacted with a robot arm. That's not something that people do in their normal day to day. And the first time you're going to do it, you're going to be naked on a table. That is rough. Good luck. So having the clothing really adds to the comfort of people, especially in their first time experiences. It also is key for temperature management. This is one of those things that might surprise you, surprised us. The amount of sensitivity people have to the temperature of the room is quite high. You're just lying there, it could be a little too cold, a little too warm. We don't control your thermostat. Maybe that's a future feature to add in, tie us to your thermostat. We'll regulate it for you and find the optimum temperature for your spa. But we don't control that. And we get feedback, the tables are too cold, too warm. That gets much worse if you're not wearing clothes. And typically the way spas and studios handle this is they have a sheet that they lay on top of you. And as they go through the massage, they're moving that sheet around. And if you know things about robotics, managing deformable sheets was not exactly practical when we started this journey. Even now, still not that practical. It's starting to look like it's on the horizon of possible to get some of these things out in the wild. But when we were trying to ship, we didn't need another research project on top of all of our existing research projects to figure out how to manipulate fabric and sheeting throughout the course of the massage. And then you also have to manage lubrication, right? So we have prototypes where we are spraying, lubrication onto the body, and then that's helping to manage the friction properly. A lot of complexities with that. It gets absorbed over time, so the friction profile changes. The absorption rate is dependent on the individual person. It is not uniform. It matters. Hair can interface with this as well. And then you have cleanliness issues. So the person before you came in and some of their hair from their back is still on the touch point or the effector because it wasn't properly cleaned. That's not great, right? So we eliminated all of those different problems with the having our own apparel, with the trade-off of being higher operational complexity for our partners, the conversation comes up now and then, right? Because it is a real pain point, and we try to make it as easy as possible, but it's not without its drawbacks as well.
I appreciate how like you're able to say, "Hey, there were some downsides with this decision, and there's some trade-offs we had to make, but because it was such a big win in another, I guess, decision criteria that it just made that trade-off make sense."
And the piece that I didn't mention before, but is really critical, is the convenience factor. So by having this clothing, this apparel, it allows us to be much more routine, which is really a core goal of ours, right? Is to build recovery into your routine than we would be if you required a shower after the massage, right? After the session. Now you can go in your lunch break, you can get a 30-minute massage, and you can immediately leave and go on with your day, right? You don't feel sticky and like you have to go home and rinse off after coming in.
That's actually a great point. After I got my massage, I just put on my clothes and just walked out, and I was just went about the rest of my day as normal. That's so true. Uh, um, you mentioned that there were some things that you were thinking about, but hey, maybe that's more of a research project. Um, in general, going from an R&D phase at Escape to a place where you guys are scaling the product, scaling deployments, multiple, more than 100 of robots, what changes about the product function in that phase? What are the things that you're focused on differently between the two, or any lessons that you can just share for folks going through that similar transition?
It has to become more data driven. That's just a key part of transitioning. Before shipping, or even when you have just a few systems, you could be much more, ears to the ground, right with your product, right with your partners and your customers, and your intuition matters a lot, right, for what's the right thing to prioritize. After shipping into a scale, just prioritization becomes lossy. A lot of the information just gets a little hazy or can disappear, right? Like you're getting Slack messages or different tickets. They're kind of vague. They missed information. You're not quite sure how to debug what's being reported or even how much it's a problem. So the feedback that you get becomes much fuzzier. And there's a few ways to compensate for this. One of them is you lean into scaled analytics, right? And you say, we're going to event all of these different things. We're going to track how often these things happen. And then we're going to prioritize based off of frequency and severity. That's good, right? Like we've relied on that quite a bit. And you want to build that system to be efficient. And with that, you need to also pay close attention to the quality of information that you have coming through. We've had this come up ourselves as tickets start looking generic. They get assigned to buckets of things. Feedback gets missed, right? So you have to make sure you can still get that high quality feedback coming through when relying on a system for kind of scaled analytics and prioritization. Like you need to actually get the severity. You need to be able to close the loop between your partnerships team, between your field service team, your customers who are on the ground, and the actual product team, right? Keep that gap as small as possible.
On that, I imagine just because of the nature of your robots being used kind of every day by different people, a lot of changeovers, operations is a big part about how you think about building this experience. We talked about some of those trade-offs too, but in your business now, how much of it is really about just operations? Like how easy is it to install, to maintain, to service, and how do you think about that?
I can't underemphasize how important this part of the business is, right? Smooth operations makes a massive difference. And our first version of the system, right, we're trying to get out into market as quickly as possible. So you end up making trade-offs that naturally, make it harder to maintain, make it harder to swap out electronics when they fail. You pay for these things later on, which, mind you, is sometimes the right decision, right? You need to go to market quickly. You need to be able to put yourself in a position to learn and know that you are doing so with a debt that you will pay down later. Can still be the right decision, but you will be paying that back, right? So you might ship with a Gen 1 that is a little bit difficult to operate and maintain. And then your Gen 2 ends up being a little bit more dominated by making that scalability really function well. But if you're not set up to operate and maintain it, you end up with a lot of bogged down, stressed out people.
A lot of engineers as well just don't fully appreciate how hard operations is and how important it is. Um, also now, right, at your scale, uh, you can't just think about cool technology too. You have to think about the bottom line. Um, have you changed how you've thought about the product given these decisions now have to connect to unit economics at scale?
So absolutely, the unit economics are critical. That said, before our first shipment, we didn't know what the actual unit economics would be, right? This is a brand new product. How much is someone really willing to pay for it? How many sessions per day is it going to support? How many can we drive to it? What is the average price of session, the average order value, the LTV of the customer, the CAC? Like all of this is unknown. So if you don't have the actual value you're delivering, the unit economics part is very hazy. So naturally, everything feels negotiable, and you end up bloating the BOM, the overall price of the product, as you are focused more on value than cost. Right? If your platform can't deliver the value, the cost is moot. Right? So you need to find the model in which people are willing to pay for, and then really hone in the unit economics on cost. But you can't get so carried away that you couldn't get the cost to a reasonable point afterwards, or that you couldn't stomach the cost in your runway to actually ship and deploy these systems, right? In some cases, you have to sell the systems cheaper than what it costs you to build, knowing you can bring down the price over time so that you can find that here is the actual data points that say product market fit is this product at this price to this consumer with this operations workflow, right? All of the pieces around it, and we can deliver that. So once you have the numbers, everything gets a lot easier, a lot more straightforward, and you come back and you're like, do we really need this much compute? Do you really need 3 PCs in this thing, right? Or you just have one, right? Do you need 2 GPU slots or one for the future models that you're trying to run on device? You start going through the features, especially now with RAM, and compute cost is quite high, which hopefully evens out in the near-term future. You go through, do we need 4 cameras, right? We have 4 camera slots on our system. Can you do it with 2? Can you do it with 1? What's the level of optimization can you go through? Can you get the cost of the arms themselves to be lower? You start going through all of these optimizations. But once you have figured out what people pay for it, all of these things get a lot easier. Or I'll say a lot more straightforward. Easy is not an apt term for robotics.
It's never easy. It's never easy in robotics. Um, Something else that wasn't easy that you mentioned was hiring people in the early days. You talked about how you would literally say, "Hey, get on the table and get a massage to show you how good this experience actually is, how safe it actually is." Um, Outside of that, though, it feels like hiring in robotics is quite difficult because it's very multidisciplinary. Um, what do you look for when hiring product people for robotics? What makes a great product person at a robotics company?
The first thing to note is that it's very hard to find all of the things you want in a product person in a single person, especially for robotics, right? They need to have the technical curiosity, if not the direct background, to really understand and be a close partner to the engineering teams. They need to be data oriented enough, ideally with their own skills, which thankfully is becoming easier and easier to actually understand, what are the right issues to prioritize. They should have a good HRI and design sense, right? So human robot interaction. Thinking about the UX, a lot of these times they're brand new experiences, right? It's very different than building a website, and that everyone will have interacted with thousands of websites, but none of us have interacted with thousands of different robots. So building an intuition about what is good practice or not is hard, right? And not to be taken for granted. So you need to have someone whose taste you trust in making these decisions. And they need to be passionate about the customer, right? So it's easy when you look at robotics of you get a lot of people who are very excited about the technology. You get a lot fewer people who are both that and excited about the specific customer that you have, which matters a lot in delivering the features that really resonate, right? So who is our member coming in? What are their problems? What do they need? Really focusing in on that while still being excited enough about the technology and the system itself. And the last thing I'll mention to look for is really having a systems mentality. I find that this helps a lot with being able to digest the complexity of the system of the robot that you're delivering, right? If you can just keep track of here's all the different components and how they relate to each other and what predicates the other piece when you build it, can you actually build out a multi-year roadmap to get to some of the features that you're talking about and make a cohesive and compelling narrative around the incremental wins along the way and why each one of those matters while building towards this future thing that really is seamless and really works.
Nick, this has been great. Would love to close us off with a quick lightning round, and get us out of here. First, what advice would you give to founders or engineers who are about to scale their first real fleet of robots?
Give a few things. First, love your customer. Be willing to say who your customer is and who they are not. The latter is the harder thing to do and is really key. You can never have too much focus, right? Pick who your customer is within your overall market segment, narrow down to one small bit and say, this is who I'm selling to, and this is why, and I'm going to make sure they love this thing. Then I would say build the pipeline in the system, so a slightly different phase, to deeply understand how your product is performing in the wild. Give it good care and make sure you can really see what's happening under the hood. And work backwards from the ideal experience, right? Don't get too caught up in the technology and exactly what is possible. You need to separate yourself from that, at least in moments, and look at what is the ideal experience for this customer, including operations, right? Which gets overlooked, right? Like what are the details in which that they operate their business outside of your product? So look at the more broad ways of these are the things they do in their day-to-day operations. And what is the ideal experience of solving some need in that existing operational flow, right? And that'll help really hone in that product market fit earlier than just focusing on the specific solution itself.
Amazing. You've been building in robotics for a while. Why do you love robotics?
I love that it's hard, which is feels like a masochistic thing to say because it's hard. It's a it's a lot of work, but it's so exciting. The problems are really interesting, and for me, I like the fusion of like seeing what I build physically exist is really rewarding. My dad's a carpenter, so I kind of grew up building and creating things around the house, and then I loved all the things you could do with software. And how do I do both of these things together, right? So coupling the two of them is really where a lot of my interests and passions lie. And then with Aescape and with robotics in general, I think there's so much opportunity to transform daily life and make a real impact over the next coming decades that it just is such a fun space to be in.
Right there with you. And last, how can the audience help you? If you have any shout outs or call to actions, feel free.
Biggest thing is go give it a shot. Go try an Aescape massage. Go try book something at one of our partners. We have locations all across the US. Send feedback. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn, send me a note, make suggestions for improvements, get engaged, follow us on Instagram.
I can second and say that the Aescape experience was amazing as someone who's used the massage, and I recommend it to all my friends, and I would recommend it to the audience. Nick, it's clear that you and your team have built a product with craft and obsession, and I strongly believe that you're building a really awesome brand and experience, and excited for the rest of the world to get to experience it. Thank you again for taking the time. Had a lot of fun.
Thank you so much.
And yeah, we'll see you later. Take care, everyone.